all the stuff that we do here. And we're talking about this whole idea of this is what we do, this is my favorite part right here. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be in the series that we are calling This Is What We Do. And we're going to highlight some of the areas of our ministry here. And we're going to kind of connect some dots in the process of helping us understand that what we do is driven by what we do. In fact, I want to go ahead and make a statement that my wife would probably, if she were here, and she's a grammar person, would probably tell me that's not really grammatical, but she's not here, she's in Indiana, so I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. But basically, it's this. This is what we do is fueled by this is what we do. And so I get that that's a little redundant and so on, but what I have to understand is there's a lot of stuff that fits into this is what we do as a church, but there is one part of this is what we do that kind of pours gasoline onto that fire. And it really comes down to you and how we all partner together. In fact, I'm going to say it like this: when we partner with our time, and we partner with our abilities, and we partner with our finances, one of the things that we tend to do is we pour gasoline onto the fire of this is what we do. Because whether we know it or not, we all have a part to play. And all of us together is a really beautiful thing. And so when we talk about this idea of abundant living and abundant giving, we understand that it drives the ministry of the church. So over the next couple of weeks, as you might guess, we're going to talk a little bit about money. Now, as we talk about money, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because I'm one of those guys that I probably don't talk about money enough. And the reality is I grew up in the 1980s. So if you know anything about the 80s, it's the best decade of music. Anybody with me? Okay. My wife hates it when she gets in the car and it's on 80s on 8. She's like, can you just not get out of that decade right there? But also, it was also the decade of extravagance, and it was the decade of excess, and it was also the decade that had a lot of televangelists on TV. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. I won't give you the examples themselves, but while I was in college in Dallas during the early 90s, there was two different occasions where I had kind of those passing by encounters with people that were in the televangelist world. And I can just probably, the best way for me to say it is it was cringeworthy to see how they carried themselves and the way they drew attention to themselves, and knowing that much of their life was connected with just asking people about money. And so I don't want to be that guy. But I will tell you, God is a big God. And since God is a really big God, God can do abundant things with limited resources. In fact, this is what it says in Ephesians chapter 3. Paul is praying for the church. And as he is finishing his prayer for the church, he says this: now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than what we ask, or all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. That power at work within us is the Holy Spirit. That God is able to do abundantly more than what we can even fathom in our minds. And actually, there's a story in the ministry of Jesus, and I absolutely love to preach this particular passage right here, and there's so many different things that we can pull out of it, but there's a story in the life of Jesus where he displays the abundance of God. And so we find this in Mark chapter 6. And as you're turning to Mark chapter 6, let me just kind of give you a little bit of the setting of what is going on. Jesus had actually sent out the 72. He sent out the 72 followers, 2 by 2, and they went out to the countrysides, they went out to the villages, and they told people about Jesus. They performed miracles, they healed people. They did what Jesus was able to do. And so they had all now come back together, and Jesus was wanting to find a quiet place to go. He was wanting to go on a ministry retreat with his closest followers, get a little R&R, and celebrate the ministry that had been done. And so they're at the Sea of Galilee. And so they're at this point over here, and they get in a boat, and they're going across the sea, across the lake. And the people, knowing that they're crossing the lake, rather than respecting that they're going off by themselves, they kind of get, and they go from town to town, to village, and so on like that. And as they were going through, the crowds got larger, and when Jesus arrived, he saw the crowd. And we find this in Mark chapter 6, verse 34. It says, when they went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So if you look at the heading that is in your Bibles, if you're reading a Bible, it says the feeding of the 5,000. And so we understand that Jesus is getting ready to perform probably the miracle that people associate with him more than any other. They think about the feeding of the 5,000 and him walking on water. Those are like the two biggies, and these happen back to back. So we know that Jesus is getting ready to feed the 5,000. This is not just 5,000. This is 5,000 men. There again would have been women there. There would have been kids. So let's just even think about this. If you can just picture the pit in Albuquerque. If you've anybody been to the pit, I assume a few of you have gone there. The pit almost full of people. That's the amount of people that Jesus has as far as the crowd is concerned. But notice this. Notice that he doesn't immediately feed them. In fact, before he feeds them physically, he feeds them spiritually. He begins to teach them. And so when we talk about this is what we do must address the eternal and spiritual needs of people. I mean, we can talk all we want about all the good things we do in the community. Next week, we're going to show you a video about Love Week and different things like that. Well, here's the reality. The world loves us to do good things, but it is offensive if we do good things and never get to the spiritual things that they actually need to hear and that will bring them to Jesus. So Jesus, knowing that there was a spiritual need, knowing that there was a physical need, addressed the spiritual need first. And I think that's important for us to understand. But as we read on, Jesus begins to take care of the physical need. Listen to verse 35. It says that when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, You give them something to eat. And they said to him, Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? So they've already summarized that it's actually going to take a half year's wage to feed all these people. And it says, And he said to them, How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Now, in this crowd of the thousands, there was only one person that was proactive enough to bring their lunch. And think about that. There's a Stephen R. Covey lesson in there somewhere, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He was proactive. And so, but here's the reality. One of the things that they tell you in Bible college, and I'll just kind of give you a little insight into this, most miracles of Jesus come from a problem. There's a problem of some kind presented. And the problem here is you have thousands of people and you have a sack lunch. That's basically the problem that you have. But as we think about this problem, one of the things that we begin to see is 2 different mentalities that kind of come out. You see, the first mentality is that of a scarcity mentality. Scarcity mentality says, I only have. And you can fill in the blank, whatever that only have is. I want you to think about your life. Do you ever operate with a scarcity mentality? Let me tell you about when I go out to eat with my boys, and I have 3 of them. One of the things that we do, and we don't go out to eat that often with them because of the scarcity mentality, but when we go out to eat, they will say, Dad, can I get? And it's always, it's amazing to me. They could put their hands over their face and put their finger on a menu item, and they will pick the most expensive thing on the menu. And so I will usually preface when we go out to eat to say, listen, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. I, however, do not. So, I understand that we have this scarcity mentality, right? And so it can play out in many different ways, but that's where a lot of us live. We live with, I need more because I don't have enough, I only have. But Jesus introduces another mentality, and it's an abundance mentality. And the abundance mentality says, I only have, but Jesus can. I only have, but Jesus can. Notice that they were saying, we don't have enough food, and it's going to, I mean, were there mathematicians? Were they sitting there figuring out that this much food, because they said it's going to take a half year. It's a half year salary to feed all of these people. But Jesus' solution to this was, you give them something to eat. So he addresses this idea of abundance, and that he is able to take a little and do a lot with that very little. Now, here's the thing, though. Jesus doesn't just talk about abundance. He displays his abundance. In fact, we begin to understand that as he displays his abundance, we go back to what Paul says. Paul said, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than what we ask or think, according to the power that is within us. Jesus himself in John chapter 10 said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, when we talk about abundant life, we have to understand that it's not like the preachers who say if you give 10, you're going to receive 100 in return. In fact, there's just recently a preacher that preached the health and wealth prosperity message, Benny Hinn. He's probably the guy that has preached it more than anybody else, just has come out over the last month or so and said, I was wrong. The gospel is not for sale. And that's kind of earth-shattering and so on. So I don't want to be that guy, but understand that Jesus operates within a mentality that he can take our scarcity and he can do more with our scarcity than what we can do with it in our own hands. And it's a beautiful thing. But Jesus is able to address it. So notice verse 39. In verse 39 it says this, then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. They were not in New Mexico. There's green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties because there was organized people within the group. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave it to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. So we'll stop here for a moment. And this is kind of an aside sort of thing. But Jesus blessed the food. He prayed to God before the food. And I don't know if this is where the whole idea of praying before our meal comes from. But this is something that Jesus displayed in his own life, is that he even depended upon God with the basic necessities of life. And I think that's important for us to understand that even as God himself in human form, he is dependent upon the Father for his blessings in life. But then Jesus did something. He had everybody sit down. He had put everybody in groups of hundreds and groups of 50. And then he took the bread and he gave it to his disciples. So those of you who are mathematicians, let's just kind of assume with 12, you'll understand that it was not even a full loaf of bread that went to each disciple. And he gave it to each disciple. He did the exact same thing. If we're talking 12, 1/6 of a piece of fish goes to each disciple. And he says, now you feed them. You distribute this to them. In fact, as I look at this, one of the things that's important is for us to understand that I don't believe the miracle happened when Jesus blessed the food. I believe the miracle happened when Jesus distributed the food, and then further miracle as the disciples distributed the food. And so what Jesus does, this is the interesting thing to me, is Jesus takes scarcity and makes it abundant. But here's the cool thing. He took those who had the scarcity mentality, and they were the delivery system of his abundance. He said, now you do it. And I don't know how this took place because this boggles my mind. Okay, in my house, food goes away. And good food goes away quickly. I bought these little pieces of salami the other day and so on like that. They're really yummy, really good snack. Like the very next day, I went into the fridge and pulled out the crisper drawer and went, where in the world is this? Well, I had some. No, you didn't. You had all. Food goes away, right? But I don't know how this happened, whether they took a piece of bread and handed it to somebody and it just like, boom. I don't get this other than to say the miracle happened at the distribution. And Jesus depended upon those with the scarcity mentality to be the delivery system of his abundance. And I believe that is still true today, that Jesus would love to put our scarcity in his hands and allow us then to redistribute that. And here's the beautiful, beautiful thing. He depends upon us as his followers to be the delivery system of his abundance and his grace to the world. In fact, I remember several years ago we did a sermon series, Plan A, but the reality is there's no Plan B. God's Plan A for the world is the church, and it's always been the church and will always be the church. And so we have a great responsibility to be that delivery system to the world. And so here's one of the realities. When we serve, when we partner with our abilities, and when we partner with our time, and I'm going to go ahead and say this about time, I believe that sometimes time is more scarce than our finances. That we are so busy in our world that we don't have time to do what sometimes God is asking us to do. So when we take our abilities and we take our time and we take our financial resources and we give them to Jesus, we get to be the delivery system of his abundance to the world. And that's a beautiful thing. And so as a preacher, what you might expect for me to do today is just simply say this: serve more, use more of your time, use more of your talents, use more of your money, give more, serve more, just use whatever and give more to the church. And a lot of preachers might do that. I'm not going to do that today. A lot of preachers might get up and wipe their brow with their handkerchief and say, my wife and I have decided that we're going to give double and we're just going to ask you to do the same thing. I'm not going to do that. Because as I look at this passage, there's something that is essential. There's a detail, there's a scene in this story that is essential, that without this scene, without this little part of the story, everybody goes away hungry. Without this one component, the greatest miracle that we always talk about in the church goes away. So I want you to go back to verse 34. And as you're going back to verse 34, I want you to think about, the setting. Jesus is wanting time away. He's wanting a time of respite. He's wanting a time of refreshment. God has created us for rest. And Jesus is wanting a little bit of that. And so he has got this grand plan that he's going to go off with his closest followers. They're going to talk ministry, and they're going to talk success, and they're going to talk about stories, and they're going to celebrate. But when he gets to the place where they're going to go and rest, there's a crowd. And as it says in verse 34 that Jesus sees the crowd. Notice this, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. I want you to think about this. Jesus did not see people as a drain. Jesus did not see people as an obstacle. He didn't see people with frustration. He didn't see people in such a way that's like, listen, I've got my own agenda. These people are getting in the way of this. Instead, it says that he saw. And I believe what he saw was different than what you and I would see. In fact, I know that Jesus saw something different than what I would see. The other day, I told my wife, just once I'd like to go to Walmart and not have to be on. And she goes, what's the solution? Because we've even gone to the west side and you meet people. In fact, we were at Cottonwood Mall, and one time we talked to somebody for 30 minutes, and she walked away and said, now what service do they go to? And I said, oh, that's a minister from the South Valley. But I think Jesus sees what we don't see. In fact, when he saw people, it says that he had compassion. In other words, there was that inward feeling of heartbreak for them because they were lost. And I'm going to say it like this. And this is our bottom line here for today. The secret to abundant living and giving is having the heart and the eyes of Jesus. You see, it's not about having a greater burden on ourselves. It's being transformed to be more and more like Jesus in every way. And until we're willing to look up and look into people's eyes and see the hurt and to see the pain, we will never have that drive toward abundant giving and living in our lives. And so it's not about give more. It's not about serve more. It's not about more time. It's not about the burden of saying you've got to share this with your friends because you just got to do it. But when we are transformed by Jesus to become more like him, we will have a desire to give more. We will have a desire to serve more. We will have a desire to use more of our time for Jesus. We'll have more of a desire to tell our friends who are lost about Jesus. So, a couple of next steps here today. One is this, just pray. Pray that Jesus will change your heart so that you can see people the way he sees people. In fact, I think that will be one of the greatest wins of our spiritual life if we can ever get to see people the way Jesus sees people. But I will say this, trust. Trust that Jesus can use your scarcity. Trust that he can use your finances. Trust that he can use your abilities. Trust that he can use your time. And again, I think time may be the more precious commodity in our society today. I trust that Jesus can take your scarcity to be the delivery system of his abundance to those around you. Will you join me in prayer?